Millionaire ranch trader bought a savage Mustang but a little girl, tamed it, and shocked the town. The air at Lonesome Ranch was a grit-laced tapestry of desperation, raw ambition, and a loneliness so vast it mirrored the endless sky. Jasper McCall's gaze swept over the herd cold and sharp as a banker's ledger. He wasn't seeing horses. He was seeing assets on the hoof. His eyes locked on the Fury, a maelstrom of muscle and rage corralled by flimsy wood. Not a creature, but a jackpot waiting to be claimed. Trust was a currency he'd gone bust on years ago thanks to a so-called brother-in-arms who chose silver over loyalty. That lesson, paid for in blood, had forged his heart into something hard and unyielding. Every man and beast had a price. That was the only gospel he preached. But then he saw her, a slip of a girl standing before the untamable stallion, her quiet power a startling defiance to his entire world. He came for a horse. But what if the real prize and his deadliest gamble was the girl who held its soul in her hands? The name Jasper McCall was a hard-bitten currency in the territories traded in whispers of respect and fear. It meant profit. It meant a ruthless eye for horseflesh, and a heart shuddered to anything that couldn't be broken, saddled, and sold. He rode into the sprawling decay of Lonesome Ranch under a sun that baked the very soul out of the land, leaving behind a brittle quiet. The place reeked of failure, the fences leaning like tired old men, the dust a fine red powder coating a world of broken dreams. He didn't care. Dreams didn't fetch a price at auction. Amos, the ranch's owner, had eyes that matched his property worn down and defeated. "He's in the breaker's pen." Amos rasped, his voice thin as a dry creek bed. "Been through 3 of my best men. Won't take a saddle, won't take a rope. Just rage." Jasper swung down from his stallion, his boots landing with a soft thud in the ankle-deep dust. His movements were economical sharp. Wasted effort was the same as a wasted dollar. He leaned against the crude corral, and his breath caught. It wasn't a horse. It was a midnight storm trapped in hide and sinew, 1,000 pounds of defiance, its coat the color of polished jet, its eyes burning with a wild, primal fire. The Fury, they called him. A perfect name. Jasper felt the familiar cold thrill ignite in his gut, the thrill of a predator spotting magnificent prey. He could already hear the auctioneer's call, could already feel the weight of the coin in his pocket. "A true devil," Amos muttered, shaking his head. "Devils fetch a high price." Jasper set his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't take his eyes off the stallion. If they can be tamed, he can't be Amos' side. Only one person he even allows near the pen. Jasper's gaze flickered with annoyance, ready to dismiss another of the rancher's excuses. But then he saw her. She emerged from the shadow of the barn, a slip of a thing no bigger than a sapling in a storm. Dust clung to her worn buckskin dress, and her braid was the color of sun-scorched wheat. She moved with a strange, unnerving stillness, her eyes fixed on the raging beast. "That's her," Amos said. "Maisie Longstride." Jasper almost scoffed. This child, this was the answer to 1,000 pounds of demonic fury? It was absurd. He'd seen tough, leather-skinned men broken by horses half as wild. He opened his mouth to say as much, but the words died on his tongue. Maisie didn't approach the pen with a rope or a bit. She simply stood by the fence, her hands resting on the top rail, and she waited. The stallion, which had been crashing against the far side of the corral, suddenly went still. It turned its massive head, its flared nostrils tasting the air. Its fiery eyes found hers. A low sound, almost a hum, drifted from the girl's lips. It wasn't a command. It was a question spoken in a language Jasper had never heard. The Fury took a step, then another. The violent tension in its muscles seemed to melt away, replaced by a wary, profound curiosity. Jasper watched his own heart, a thing he thought long dead, giving a single, hard thump against his ribs. He didn't understand what he was seeing. It wasn't training. It was something else, something ancient and unnerving. It was a quiet power that his money couldn't buy and his force couldn't break. And his mind, ever the calculator, made an immediate, cold-blooded pivot. The horse alone was a prize. The horse tamed by a ghost of a girl. That was a legend. Legends sold for fortunes. He turned to Amos, his voice cutting through the reverent silence. "I'll take him." Amos blinked. "But he's not broken. Double your highest offer." Jasper stated, his eyes still locked on the girl. "On one condition." He finally looked at Amos, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "She comes with him." "Not for my purposes," he added, a flicker of irritation crossing his face at the thought. "As his trainer. A contract. She gets him ready for the Eastern market. Her and the horse. They're a package deal." He had laid his trap, the perfect business proposition. He had come for a beast of legend. He never imagined its soul would be tied to a girl who fought devils not with force but with a whisper. The trail was a long, unforgiving ribbon of dust, and the silence was a living thing between them. For 3 days they moved through a world painted in broad, brutal strokes of sun and stone. Jasper McCall rode with the stiff-backed impatience of a man whose mind was already at the destination, counting profits that hadn't yet been earned. He had acquired his assets, the untamed horse, and the quiet girl who was its key. Now came the tedious part of the transaction, the journey, the training, the time spent in proximity to another human being. It was an unfortunate, necessary cost of business. He watched her work at dawn when the sky was a soft, bruised purple and the air held a deceptive chill. He expected ropes. He expected a fight, a battle of wills where man or woman dominated beast. That was the language he understood. Instead, he saw a frustrating, maddening patience. Maisie never seemed to train the fury at all. She simply existed alongside him. She would lead him to a patch of silver sage, her hand not on a rope, but hovering just inches from his powerful neck, and she would stand there, breathing in time with the great, slow rise and fall of his ribs. She spoke to him in a low, constant murmur. Words Jasper couldn't catch, words that sounded less like commands and more like confessions. "What is this?" he finally growled one morning, the inefficiency grating on his nerves. "At this rate, he'll die of old age before he's fit for a saddle. Are you ever going to break him?" Maisie turned her head, her gaze clear and unnervingly direct. It held no fear of him, only a calm certainty that he found more unsettling than outright defiance. "You don't break things you want to trust you, Mr. McCall," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the wind. "You listen to them." He scoffed, turning away to busy himself with his saddle, annoyed by the simple, unassailable logic of her words. He had never listened to anything but the jingle of coin and the frantic beating of his own solitary heart. That night, the campfire crackled, a small circle of warmth against a vast and profound darkness. The prairie sky was a spill of diamond dust, immense and indifferent. He was cleaning his revolver, the familiar methodical ritual a comfort in his hands. Across the fire she sat mending a piece of leather, her small fingers moving with a quiet, practiced grace. The silence pressed in, no longer empty but filled with unspoken questions. "You're not afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Out here. Of the dark. Of me." She didn't look up from her work. "The dark is just the dark. And you made a deal, Mr. McCall. A man who honors his deals isn't a man to be feared." His hands stilled. "A man who honors his deals." The words were a casual observation, but they struck him like a physical blow, a judgment on the ghosts of his past. He felt a sudden sharp need to shatter her quiet composure. "Trust is a fool's game." He rasped the words, tasting like rust and whiskey. "Learned that from a man I once called my brother." She finally paused, her needle held mid-stitch. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something beyond placid strength in her eyes. It was a shared sorrow. "I had a brother once too," she said softly, "and a mother and a father. The fever took them 4 winters ago. Being alone teaches you to listen. You have no choice. Sometimes all you have left are the ghosts." She said it with no self-pity, just a statement of fact that laid his own walled-off bitterness bare. He felt exposed, his cynicism suddenly looking cheap and ugly in the firelight. He had nothing to say to that. He just stared into the flames, the cold armor around his heart, groaning under a strange new pressure. A crack had formed. The world intruded 2 days later in the form of a lone rider, a dust-caked messenger who brought the scent of conflict with him. He carried a challenge from a man named Thorn, a rival trader with a cruel smile and a reputation for breaking his competition. The offer was a race, a brutal cross-country scramble known as the Devil's Gamble. The prize winner take all, the Fury and Jasper's entire string of horses against Thorn's own. The wolf inside Jasper stirred its eyes gleaming. This was his language. A fight, a clear victory. "Tell Thorn," Jasper said, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "he's got himself a race." The messenger nodded and spurred his horse away, leaving a cloud of dust and the heavy weight of the challenge behind. The familiar fire of competition burned in Jasper's veins, a welcome heat that pushed back the unsettling chill Maisie had stirred in him. He would win. He would crush Thorn and double his profits in a single day. But as he turned, his gaze landed on Maisie. She was standing by the Fury, her hand resting on the stallion's powerful shoulder, calming the animal which had grown agitated by the strange rider. And Jasper knew with a certainty that shook him to his core that he couldn't win this fight alone. To ride the Fury into that hellish race required more than force. It required trust. It required her. The thrill of the coming battle was a familiar fire, but as he watched the girl and the beast, a silent, unbreakable pact under the vast sky, Jasper realized the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about proving that the untamed heart, the horses, the girls, and even his own, was the most valuable prize of all. The silence that followed the messenger's departure was heavier than any mountain. The challenge hung in the air, a declaration of war that changed the very texture of the light. The time for slow, methodical training was over. The time for a brutal, headlong gamble had arrived. Jasper turned his shadow, falling long and sharp across the dusty ground, and faced Maisie. He had made the decision in a heartbeat, a pure, predatory reflex. Now came the difficult part, speaking it aloud, admitting a dependency he found both galling and necessary. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet. The Devil's Gamble is no simple race. It's 100 miles of badlands, canyons, and cracked salt flats. A beast of a track for a beast of a horse? He paused, forcing the words out, each one a concession. Thorn is a snake, but his horses are fast. The Fury is faster, but he's a storm. Unpredictable. His gaze, hard as flint, met hers. "I can't control a storm. But you can ride one. I need you on that horse with me, Maisie. I need you to be his calm." He hated the word need. It was a vulnerability, a weakness he had long since scoured from his vocabulary. But there it was, hanging between them, undeniable. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She simply held his gaze, her own eyes a deep, unreadable well of quiet strength. She seemed to be weighing not his words, but the truth behind them. "Show me the map," she said simply. They spent the next day in a state of intense, focused collaboration. Spread across a worn saddle blanket was a crude drawing of the race course, a suicidal scrawl of treacherous switchbacks, a long, narrow canyon known as the Gut, and a final desperate gallop across a dry lake bed that shimmered like a mirage under the relentless sun. The starting line and the finish were the same, a brutal loop designed to break horses and men. Here Jasper set his calloused finger tracing a jagged line. "Thorn will try to force us into the canyon wall at this hairpin turn. It's his signature move, dirty but effective." Maisie leaned closer, her braid brushing his arm. Jasper flinched internally at the contact, a strange, unwelcome jolt of electricity. He ignored it. "No," she whispered, her focus absolute. "The Fury won't take that narrow path if he feels trapped. He'll fight it. He'll bolt left up the scree slope. It looks dangerous, but the footing is better than it seems." She looked up at him. "We don't fight his nature. We use it. We let him think he's choosing his own path to escape." He stared at her, a slow, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. She wasn't just a horse whisperer. She was a strategist. She saw the soul of the animal, not just its legs. For the first time, he felt like he had more than just an asset. He had an ally. They worked on the saddle together, a silent, rhythmic dance. He reinforced the main cinch, testing the leather for any sign of weakness, his powerful hands moving with grim purpose. She, in turn, wove and braided a thick, sturdy handhold into the back of the saddle cantle, a place for her to anchor herself against the violent lunging power of the horse. Their hands brushed more than once. Each time, Jasper would pull back as if burned his heart, giving a hard, unfamiliar kick. He told himself it was the tension of the race, the high stakes. He was a master of self-deceit. That night, sleep was a distant country he could not reach. The weight of the gamble was a physical pressure on his chest. He was betting his entire livelihood, his reputation, everything he had clawed and fought for since the day his world had turned to ash. He rose from his bedroll and walked out into the cold silvered light of the moon. He saw her by the makeshift corral. She was standing with the Fury, her forehead pressed gently against the horse's massive velvet-soft nose. Her hands stroked his neck, and she was whispering to him again. Secrets in the dark. Promises. Jasper stood in the shadows, a ghost at the edge of their sacred circle, and felt a profound, aching loneliness that was sharper than any betrayal. He was a wolf, ever solitary. But watching them, he felt the first terrifying pang of wanting to belong to a pack. The morning of the race arrived with a tension so thick it felt like thunderheads gathering. The starting area was a chaotic swirl of color, noise, and nervous energy. Men shouted bets, horses stamped and snorted, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, whiskey, and fear. Thorn rode up to them, his horse a fine-boned but vicious-looking sorrel. He smirked, his eyes filled with a casual cruelty as he looked at Maisie, perched behind Jasper on the massive frame of the Fury. McCall, Thorn drawled loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Didn't think you had the sand to show. And what's this bringing ballast, or are you so spooked by that black devil you need a little girl to sing him a lullaby?" Jasper's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles turning white. A cold, murderous rage flared within him. But before he could unleash the venomous retort on his tongue, Maisie's voice, quiet but clear, came from directly behind his ear. "He's not scared," she said. "He's smart." Jasper's anger vanished, replaced by a sudden fierce surge of pride. He looked straight ahead, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. He didn't need to say a word. They moved to the starting line, a long, chaotic row of raw horsepower and desperate men. He could feel Maisie's light frame settle behind him, a tangible weight of responsibility. Her hands found the braided grip, her knuckles pressing lightly against his back. The world narrowed. The shouting crowd faded. The other riders became ghosts. All that existed was the dust-choked path ahead, the explosive power of the beast beneath him, and the steady, quiet breathing of the woman who held its heart, and perhaps his own, in her small, capable hands. An official raised a polished revolver to the sky. The world held its breath. The hammer fell. The world exploded. A symphony of chaos erupted from the starting line, a raw, concussive blast of hoofbeats and guttural shouts. Dust rose in a blinding, choking wave, a red shroud that swallowed the sky. Beneath him, Jasper felt the fury coil and release its power. Not like a horse, but like a thunderbolt striking the earth. The initial violent lurch was enough to unseat the devil himself, but Jasper was ready for it, his body and will, a seamless extension of the leather and steel that bound him to the beast. He was in his element, a predator in the heart of the hunt, his entire being narrowed to a single savage purpose forward. Behind him, he felt Maisie. She was a feather-light presence, yet an undeniable anchor. As they hurtled into the first treacherous bend, a mess of rock and scree, he felt her hand press lightly on his right side, a silent command. He obeyed instinctively, shifting his weight, guiding the fury away from a patch of loose gravel he hadn't even seen. They moved as one entity, a creature of 4 legs, 2 hearts, and a single desperate will to outrun the world. They hit the gut. The infamous canyon pass a narrow claustrophobic wound in the earth. The thunder of their own passage echoed back at them, a deafening roar. Jasper saw Thorn Sorrel trying to close the gap, angling to pin them against the rock wall. It was a classic, brutal move. The old Jasper would have met force with force, a dangerous gamble. But then he felt the whisper of Maisie's breath near his ear. "Let him run," she murmured, her voice a thread of calm in the hurricane of noise. "Give him the wall. Trust." The word was a foreign country, but he did it. He eased his grip almost imperceptibly, giving the fury the illusion of choice. As Thorn surged, expecting to crush them, the fury veered sharply left, just as Maisie had predicted, scrambling up a steep rocky incline with the terrifying agility of a mountain goat. They burst from the canyon's end back into the blinding sunlight, leaving Thorn and 2 other riders trapped in the bottleneck below, cursing in a cloud of their own dust. Freedom! The land opened up before them, a vast, sun-bleached plain, stretching toward a finish line that was no longer a dream, but a rapidly approaching reality. The wind tore at them, a wild song of victory in their ears. For a single unguarded moment, Jasper felt something other than the cold fire of competition. It was a feeling of pure, unbridled joy. A harmony so perfect between horseman and woman that it felt sacred. He was no longer just a trader on the back of an asset. He was riding the wind itself. And then the world shattered. It happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. A flash of white on the ground, the sun-bleached skull of a long-dead steer, and a coiled rattlesnake sunning beside it. The fury, seeing the twin specters of death, reacted with a violent primal terror that no training could ever erase. He didn't rear. He swerved, a lateral bone-jarring leap of pure instinct. Jasper held on his thighs, screaming in protest, his grip like iron on the reins. But the sideways motion was too sudden, too violent. He heard Maisie's cry, not a scream, but a short, sharp gasp of surprise that was cut off with horrifying finality. He felt her weight vanish from behind him. Time broke. The thunder of the hooves, the pounding of his own heart, the distant roar of the crowd. It all slowed to a thick, syrupy silence. He risked a glance over his shoulder. She was a crumpled heap of buckskin and dust on the hard-packed earth. Small. So terribly still. The race screamed the wolf inside him, the voice of 20 years of solitude and survival. The finish line is right there. Win. She is an asset, a complication. Winthorn's horse thundered past a blur of red, the rider's face a mask of triumphant glee. He was losing. He was losing everything he had ever worked for. But the image of Thorn's face was immediately erased by the memory of Maisie's, her quiet strength by the fire, her calm, trusting eyes, the feel of her hand resting on the fury's neck, the way she spoke of ghosts as if they were old friends. She is not an asset, a new voice answered a voice he barely recognized as his own. She is Maisie. It wasn't a choice. It was a rebellion, a revolution in his soul. With a raw, guttural roar, Jasper pulled back on the reins. He wasn't just stopping. He was fighting 1,000 pounds of forward momentum of raw, terrified power. The Fury screamed in protest, fighting his command, but Jasper's will was now absolute, forged in a new and terrifying fire. He brought the storm to a dead, shuddering halt. He swung his leg over the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that echoed the fall of his old life. The race, the money, the reputation, it all thundered away from him, a ghost of a life he no longer wanted. He was alone on the vast, silent plain, surrounded by nothing but the sun, the dust, and the still form of the girl. He took his first step toward her. The first step he took toward her broke the spell. The world, which had slowed to a syrupy silent dread, crashed back into focus. The wind howled in his ears. His own blood roared. The race, his fortune, his entire life's ambition, it all thundered away from him, a ghost stampede vanishing over the horizon. He was left in a profound and sudden quiet, the silence of a world that had shrunk to a single fragile point, the crumpled shape of Maisie in the dust. He ran. His long legs ate up the ground, each stride a denial of the man he had been just minutes before. He knelt beside her, his movements uncharacteristically clumsy, his hand so steady on a revolver or a fistful of reins now trembling as they hovered over her. Her face was pale, a fine sheen of sweat on her brow, her lips pressed tight against a sound of pain. He saw it immediately, the unnatural angle of her shoulder, the way she cradled her arm against her body. A clean dislocation, agonizing but not fatal. The relief that washed over him was so potent, so absolute, it nearly brought him to his knees. Maisie. His voice was a raw, broken thing he didn't recognize. "Can you hear me? Don't try to move." Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain, but focused on his face. A tear traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. "Jasper." "You stopped," she whispered, her voice a thread of disbelief. "The race. Damn the race." He growled the words torn from the very root of his soul. "The race is over." In that moment he saw it. The finish line, the crowds, the makeshift town that was the closest place to find a doctor, to find help. It was a cruel irony. The destination he had just abandoned was now his only hope for her salvation. He looked from her to the Fury. The great black stallion stood where he had left him, his sides heaving, his eyes wild, but he had not bolted. He was watching them, a silent, intelligent sentinel. "All right, Maisie," Jasper said, his voice softening, taking on a tone of command she had never heard from him before. Not the command of a master, but of a protector. "I'm going to lift you. It's going to hurt like hell. I'm sorry, but I have to get you out of here." The apology hung in the air, a foreign and monumental word from a man like him. She gave a small, pained nod, her trust in him absolute. He gathered her up with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. She was impossibly light, a bird with a broken wing in his arms. Her sharp intake of breath as her shoulder moved was a knife in his gut, but he held her tight against his chest, murmuring reassurances he didn't know he knew how to give. He moved to the horse, and the Fury. The untamable storm stood stock still, lowering his head as if in understanding. Jasper mounted, then carefully situated her in front of him, cradling her against his body, his left arm a steel band around her waist, his right hand taking the reins. They started forward, not at a gallop, but a steady ground-eating canter that was as smooth as he could make it. His world was no longer the race course, no longer the competition. It was the pained, shallow breaths she took against his shirt, the slight tremor that ran through her body, the fierce primal need to shield her from any further harm. As they crested the final rise, the finish line came into view. The scene was one of chaos and celebration. He could see Thorne surrounded by his men, holding a purse of gold aloft. The crowd was a roaring, faceless monster. Then the roar began to falter. Heads turned. A confused murmur rippled through the onlookers as they saw the second arrival. It was a spectacle no one there would ever forget. The legendary black stallion not charging in victory but carrying its rider at a solemn, deliberate pace. And the rider, the ruthless Jasper McCall, was not sitting in triumph. He was hunched over his body a shield, and in his arms he held the limp form of the girl, his face a mask of grim, absolute focus. He crossed the finish line. There was no cheer for him, just a wave of stunned, awestruck silence. He didn't even register it. He ignored Thorne's triumphant sneer, ignored the race officials running toward him. His eyes scanned the crowd, wild and desperate. A doctor. He bellowed, his voice like a crack of thunder that silenced the remaining murmurs. "Get me a doctor." Now he swung down, lifting Maisie from the saddle before anyone could offer help. He pushed through the gawking crowd, his gaze burning with a fire that made men twice his size step aside. He found an empty tent used for supplies, laid her gently on a pile of canvas, and turned to face the official who had followed him in. "I don't care about the purse," Jasper snarled, pulling a thick wad of bills from his own pocket, his entire stake in the race. "This is for the doctor. Find the best one in this God-forsaken territory, and you bring him here. The rest is for his trouble." He dropped the money on the ground, not even waiting for a reply. He turned back to Maisie, kneeling beside her, and used his bandana to gently wipe the dust from her forehead. The race was over. The noise was gone. And in the quiet hum of the tent watching over her, he felt a profound and wrenching peace that no amount of gold, no victory, no shouted acclaim had ever come close to giving him. He had lost the race, but in the ruins of his ambition, he had found his soul. Night fell on the camp, not with a sudden finality, but with a slow, gentle grace, as if the land itself were exhaling. The raucous energy of the race had dissipated, replaced by the low murmur of campfires and the immense star-dusted silence of the desert. Inside a small canvas tent, a single lantern cast a warm, golden glow, creating a sanctuary from the vast darkness outside. Jasper McCall sat on a rough-hewn crate, his forearms resting on his knees, and watched Maisie sleep. The doctor, a grim man with surprisingly gentle hands, had come and gone. He had set her shoulder, bound it tightly, and left a bottle of laudanum for the pain she would surely feel when the shock wore off. Jasper hadn't let anyone else near the tent. He had become its silent, unmovable guardian. The adrenaline of the past hours had drained away, leaving in its place a profound, bone-deep weariness, yet beneath it was a feeling he couldn't name. A stillness, a sense of rightness that felt more real than any victory he had ever known. Her eyes opened slowly, not clouded with pain, but clear and lucid. They found him instantly, as if she knew he would be there. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice a little hoarse. "I'm still here," he confirmed, his own voice low and rough. She shifted slightly, a wince of pain crossing her features before she settled. "You lost the race, Jasper. You lost everything. For me." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. He leaned forward, meeting her gaze in the soft light, and for the first time the armor was completely gone. There was no traitor, no wolf, only the man underneath, exposed and vulnerable. "No Maisie," he said, the words feeling new and momentous on his tongue. "I didn't lose it. I threw it away. There's a difference." He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. "When I first saw you, I saw a tool, a key to unlocking the fortune that horse represented. I was going to use you, just like I use everything and everyone. I'm sorry." The apology was the hardest thing he had ever said, and the truest. A single tear welled in her eye, but she smiled, a faint, beautiful curve of her lips. "You didn't use me, Jasper. You saved me." She paused, her gaze searching his. "You were never more of a winner than in the moment you chose to lose." His heart ached with the truth of her words. He stood, the movement sudden. "Wait here." He stepped out into the cool night air and returned a moment later carrying something heavy, wrapped in a canvas sheet. He knelt by her cot and unwrapped it. The rich earthy smell of freshly oiled leather filled the tent. It was a saddle, but it was unlike any saddle he had ever owned. It was a work of art, crafted from dark, supple leather that seemed to drink the lantern light. The silver conchos gleamed, but the true marvel was the carving that adorned the skirt, an intricate, powerful image of a great bird, its wings spread wide, rising from a swirl of flames. "It's a phoenix," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't bother to hide. "A long time ago, I had it commissioned, for a new life I never thought I'd find, one that could rise from the ashes of the old one." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. He set the saddle gently on the floor and took her good hand in his. His thumb traced circles over her knuckles. "The Fury is yours, Maisie. He was always yours. This saddle is yours, too." He took a deep, shuddering breath, laying his entire broken and remade soul at her feet. "My future. I was hoping that could be yours as well." He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a grand promise of a house or wealth. He had only this, a vow born in the dust and chaos of a race he had thrown away. "Whether it's winning a race or carrying you through a storm," he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of his promise. "Maisie, I will always be by your side." She didn't need to speak. Her answer was in the tears that now flowed freely down her cheeks. Tears not of pain, but of a profound and overwhelming joy. She squeezed his hand, a silent, powerful affirmation. He had come to this place a predator hunting a prize. He would leave a changed man, having been granted a grace he never knew he needed. Outside, the wild heart of the desert beat on, but inside the small tent, two lonely souls had finally found their sanctuary, a home built not of wood and stone, but of a promise made under a ceiling of stars. The dawn, when it came, would be the first of a new life together.